Welcome back to From Halos to Tiptoes. This is the next step in our series to making our face masks. In the last video, I showed you guys how to cut your pieces and how many pieces to cut. These were made with a pattern, 7 by 9 inches, 2 pieces of each. And you should have your pieces with the pretty side facing together. So you want it to look the same on one side and the other for both of your pieces. If you have solid color pieces, then it doesn't really matter at this stage. It will matter later once you've started to sew them together, but at this point, it doesn't really matter. So you're going to want to put this together, and then we are going to sew. I use a zigzag stitch. We're going to sew along this edge only. So this big curved rhinoceros snout looking piece, we're going to sew just down the edge of both pieces of our material. So let's get that started. Again, I use a zigzag stitch. You are going to want to make sure that you back stitch. Back stitch. There you go. Along this curved edge. You do the same thing to the other piece. Make sure that you have this lined up pretty good. If you line it up early on in the sewing process, it makes things a little bit easier later in the process, and you'll see more about that whenever I get further into the details of the sewing together of the mask. All right, so we did that one. Now we're going to do the other one, just along the curved edge. Stitch. Here we go. We have the next one done. Now, at this stage, this is going to be tucked in. This edge is going to be tucked in and make the curved part that goes over your nose and mouth. So you don't want this to be too super bulky. So I'll go along, and any pieces that I have that stick out a little bit, I'll just trim those back. And when you trim those back, be very, very careful not to cut into your thread. That's important because that's going to weaken your bond where you have this tied together. So just don't hit the edges of your thread. Just go along and trim away any extra bits that are sticking out. Especially this corner on top, that's going to make a real difference. So just snip that off and do that to both of your pieces. Got thread everywhere. All right. This one's not too bulky, just a little bit. All right, and again, clipped off the little point at the top and made that down a little bit. Now, this part can be a little bit confusing. It was for me. It took me a minute to figure this out, and I really appreciate the tutorials that I watched and have watched that have taught me all the things that I've known or that I've learned. I appreciate so much when someone takes the time to show me the things that are going to kind of snag me up in the middle. So, remember that this one is the same color on both sides, but what you want to do is we're going to pretend that this has the polka dots, okay? Either way, you've got to make one of them where this part is on the inside. So you're going to flip one of them over, okay? Just one for now. This is where I said it will matter later. It does matter now because this has got to be flipped inside, okay? Take your fingers and run them across that seam and get that nice and popped out, so that you can get it lined up really well with the other piece. Now you're going to take this piece and put it inside of this piece. This piece you want to stay wrong side out. So essentially what you're doing is you're putting the two right sides together again. So you're putting two right sides together. You see, once you have the mask, you'll have this clean edge and then this one will be popped out too. So two right sides together. I like to line up this little seam here first. It helps to get everything lined up a little bit more clean. And then just kind of shake it around and line it up with this edge here. Okay, once you do that, you're just going to take your sewing machine and you're going to stitch only the top and the bottom. These sides here, you want to leave those open. Okay, so try to keep things lined up nice and neat as you go along in the machine. It really makes a difference with the mask. You prefer it to be nice and neat out here because that gives plenty of room for everything to tuck in on the inside like it's supposed to. And again, I use a zigzag stitch for this. You might want to push down the curve a little bit when you're trying to sew this because the curve can tend to kind of pull on the edges of your mask. So I just kind of push down the curve, make sure you have this nice and lined up, and then begin your stitching. I always stop at the point, check my other end, and make sure that everything is lined up really well before I sew the other side. There we go. Push everything down so it stays out of your way. Back stitch. And again, we're leaving the side open. So again, I'll come to my point. Line it up down the side, and it might be a little uneven down here, and that's okay. You'll work all of that out in your hem stitch. Again, the most important thing is that from the point down that this part lines up, because that's what your focus is going to be, is on the middle of this mask. Push my curve down. And this tends to happen. It tends to kind of get out of line on this last quarter, and that's just from all of the adjustments that are being made. So you want to make sure that you pause and realign everything pretty well. Again, this makes a pretty big difference later on in the mask itself. If it's off, it makes it a little bit harder. Okay, stop at the edge because we're not going to sew this part here. You have it all sewn together. Now we're going to turn it right side out. I can get a hold of it. Okay. And when you do that first part of the process, the thread color doesn't really matter a whole lot because all of the thread that you just did is going to be inside the mask. Once you start to do the outer stitching, if you want to change the thread to kind of match a little bit better, then you can do that. So you pull everything through, and you're going to want to make sure that you spread your little arms out here, and then grab a hold of both of your points and really give that a good tug. Put your fingers up in there and kind of mesh that together. This is going to help you make your seam crisper when you go to press this down. Okay, so we have essentially put a mask together. Now we'll go over to the iron and I'll show you how we press this down and get it ready for the next step in sewing.